It's never too late. Just start, put one foot in front of the other, and go after it. Toni Morrison did, and hey, you might not become the most famous writer like she did right out the gate, but you gotta be bad at something before you're great at something. And I think Toni Morrison would agree that if you really want to go after it and that's your dream, do it. Hi, I'm Maxine. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today I will be reviewing Sula by Toni Morrison. I am super excited to be discussing this book. I feel like this won't necessarily be a review, but more of a brief discussion on this book. Toni Morrison is a legend, one of the greatest to ever live, and such a prolific writer who's really set the tone for storytelling even beyond her lifetime. So if you'd like to hear more about this book, please keep on watching. Okay, so before I get into this book review, I'm gonna give you a little background on how I started to read Toni Morrison and a little bit of information about her as well, of course. So the first Toni Morrison book I ever read was The Bluest Eye. I think that's one of her most well-known novels. It was her first novel as a writer, and I feel like in lots of classes, that's like one of the books that teachers choose to teach from when discussing Toni Morrison. And I feel like it's just really deep, really heavy, and a great reference of Toni Morrison and kind of how she develops as a writer in her other books. Toni Morrison came to writing a lot later in life. I think she was in her late 30s, maybe even 40s when The Bluest Eye was published. She's also known for The Song of Solomon. I think that's one of her like critically acclaimed novels. I personally haven't read it yet, but it's definitely on my list, and I hope to get to it soon and discuss it with you all like I am today with Sula. Something interesting that I learned about Toni Morrison preparing for this book is that her name isn't even Toni Morrison. I don't know how I didn't know that before. Her birth name is Chloe Ardelia Wolford. I hope I'm saying that right, but she got the name Toni Morrison because when she was 12, she was baptized in the Catholic Church, and she took the name Anthony of Padua. That's her like baptismal name, and from that her nickname became Toni. I'm not sure where she got the Morrison part from, but if you know, comment below. Knowledge is power. But yeah, I always think it's really cool when these like dope writers have these pen names and nobody knows. It's like their little secret, almost like a burner Instagram account today. They're just like, this is my pen name. Y'all don't know me yet, but I'm out here writing stuff. I love it. I feel like most people who are into books know who Toni Morrison is. She's a Black female author. I feel like most of her novels err on the side of identity, Blackness, the Black experience, but also the dark sides of existing as a Black person, and not necessarily dark in a hyper-realistic way, taking more of a mythical angle to her stories. And like I said, that's her inspiration. Those are the types of stories she read growing up, Black folklore and other folk tales. She passed away recently. It was 2019, and she was 88 when she died. I think it's so important to support writers when they're alive, support them, give them their flowers when they're still here, and I really feel like Toni Morrison was able to achieve that. So I'm thankful to know that. And also, if you want to learn more about Toni Morrison, I highly recommend you watch Pieces I Am. It's a documentary about Toni Morrison, and it's beautiful. It's amazing. I feel like I learned so much. I knew about Toni Morrison, but not like her whole life and how she really wasn't just a writer, just like a woman who decided to write one day. It had always been a passion of hers, but it just took a long time to get there. Toni Morrison's story is also inspiring to me because it's a textbook case of like, it's never too late to start something. It's never too late to achieve what you want to do. If you're 20, if you're 30, 50, it's never too late. Just start, put one foot in front of the other, and go after it. Toni Morrison did, and hey, you might not become the most famous writer like she did right out the gate, but you gotta be bad at something before you're great at something. And I think Toni Morrison would agree that if you really want to go after it and that's your dream, do it. And don't even listen to the haters. Just look within and keep going. Okay, so let's talk about this book. So in short, I would say this book is about two best friends and how they ultimately grow apart, and also just the complexity of female relationships and those dynamics. Throughout reading this book, you'll notice that the characters just hint at noticing the forces of nature and how those signs mean something to the town, to what's gonna happen, telling the future or expecting something, and also just accepting the courses of nature and not working against them. When I think back to the time period, like early 1900s, I do recognize that they were more at risk to nature and the elements in a different way that we are today. Just the simple fact of like, a lot more people worked in agriculture. If it's rainy season or if there's a drought, people lose money and they were really struggling. And now that a lot of people's work isn't reliant on nature, I do feel like we're a bit more disconnected to just paying attention to, like, in the spring the robins come, and in the fall there's a lot more squash, and just like really connected to how the seasons and just the outdoors and earth in general is a part of our living, and just being aware of that. So that natural aspect of the book intrigued me. There are all these symbols that different characters would discuss or hint at in their narrations of the book that would suggest that something was coming or something had happened, or they should have noticed that this was happening and that that would connect to something that happened later on in the book. When I first finished this book, I was a little bit frustrated because going into it, I thought it would be more of a sisterhood, happier story. And I don't know why I thought that. Like, it's Toni Morrison. It's not gonna be all warm and cuddly. But even, I feel like the first 50 pages, I didn't think it would get that dark or that there would be a rift in the friendship. So the two main characters are Sula Peace and Nell Wright. They're best friends. They come from different backgrounds. They live in this small town in Ohio, and they just grow together. They're thick as thieves. Wherever one goes, the other one follows, and they're truly sisters. Sula is more of an alternative type. She grew up in a kind of broken home. Her grandmother ran a boarding house, and it was just a lot of people in and out of her life. Her mom died at an early age, and there was like a crazy backstory with that death, and she ended up just like moving around cities. I think she went to college and ended up coming back to town later in life, but throughout that, it seemed like Sula and Nell would always stay the best of friends. It wasn't until Nell was getting married and Sula was back in town that things changed in their friendship. This is a big spoiler alert, so if you haven't read the book, close your ears. Basically, Sula sleeps with Nell's husband, and it's just the most heartbreaking scene ever. It's just a big shock to Nell. I feel like Nell is very trusting. Nothing crazy ever really happened in her life, and for something to devastate her from the two closest people, I can't imagine. She was truly distraught. She had kids by that point, and now her man was with her best friend. And like, can you imagine? I feel like I go back and forth on deciding to read the foreword of a book or not, but when it's someone of like great stature, like a Toni Morrison novel, a James Baldwin novel, I'm keen on reading the foreword, especially when it's written by the author. So in Sula, the foreword is written by Toni Morrison, and it brings up a really interesting debate that was happening at the time about Black art being political. Is all Black art inherently political? So in the foreword, Toni is talking about not only black art being inherently political, questioning that, but also female freedom and how women can go about claiming that, and ultimately the inspiration behind the characters of Sula. This book is very female character heavy. Obviously, it's about two best friends, but it's deeper in its complexities of how these women choose to operate in their town. Some of the more prominent characters are women who are prostitutes, women who don't care about their perceptions of like, oh, she's a whore or she sleeps around, and look at her, look at the way she carries herself with such pride despite that negativity that's associated with her lifestyle. And also Sula being this floater type of woman who never wants a man, sleeps around because she can and just loves to sleep with men. And then there's Nell, who's this stifled young woman whose mother, I think there's a passage in the book where it's like her mother and father kind of choked out her spark. There was nothing else there. She was just a dull girl who followed the rules, clean, prim and proper, like never was outside of the box, never strayed away from what she was taught or what she was told. But back to the point that Toni was discussing in this foreword about black art being inherently political, and I feel like this question is still posed today: is all black art political? And the best example I can think of is Jordan Peele. His movies have been super popular in not only black culture but around the world in general, but I think for different reasons. I remember when I watched Us, and so many of my black friends, I think honestly white friends too, were just like, what's the hidden message? What is this saying about race? And I was like, is this about race, or is it literally just a horror movie with a cast that happens to be black? I feel like my personal opinion on black art being inherently political goes back and forth, but today I'm gonna say that it shouldn't always be that way. We are not a monolith. We aren't all these political experts who have opinions on what's happening outside of the world. I would love to hear y'all's opinions on, like, is all black art political? What do you think about the idea? What's the value of it? What's the question about it? With all that being said, I'm going to close out this discussion with an excerpt from the foreword of the book. It may be difficult now to imagine how it felt to be seen as a problem to be solved rather than a writer to be read. James Baldwin, Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright, Zora Neale Hurston all had been called upon to write an essay addressing the problem of being a Negro writer. In that no-win situation, inauthentic, even irresponsible to those looking for a politically representative canvas, marginalized by those assessing value by how moral the characters were, my only option was fidelity to my own sensibility. Further exploration of my own interests, questions, challenges. And since my sensibility was highly political and passionately aesthetic, it would unapologetically inform the work I did. I refused to explain or even acknowledge the problem as anything other than an artistic one. Other questions mattered more. What is friendship between women when unmeditated by men? What choices are available to black women outside their own society's approval? What are the risks of individualism in the determinedly individualistic yet racially uniform and socially static community? Female freedom always means sexual freedom, even when, especially when, it is seen through the prism of economic freedom. Hannah, Nell, Eva, Sula were points of a cross, each one a choice for characters bound by gender and race. The nexus of that cross would be a merging of responsibility and liberty difficult to reach, a battle among women who are understood to be least able to win it. Okay, I feel like that is a great entrance into the book if you haven't read it, but also it adds context if you have read it, and ultimately it just makes you think. She's talking about being a black writer and being perceived in all these different ways, and also the weight of being seen as a voice for black people and speaking for all black people. So yeah, very interesting. Love Toni Morrison. Highly recommend you read some of her books. If you've only read one of her works, I challenge you to read another one. If you haven't read Sula, I challenge you to read that one. If you have any recommendations for me, please leave them below. If you have any thoughts or comments about Sula, leave them below as well. I really love doing these books and I would love to engage with people more online. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.